like everything in life, it is one FFmpeg command, but it'll take you 3 hours to figure out what that command actually is.
Yeah. All right, so you want to do a little follow-up?
Follow-up.
As soon as I said that, I was like, oh, God, that sounded a lot like the prompt.
Just the way you said it.
I know. All right, let's do that again. Hey, so you want to do a little bit of follow-up?
Follow-up.
God, I did it again! God! This is the worst. All right, somebody else talk.
Don't phrase it as a question, Casey.
All right, let's do some follow-up. See, you're right. That's the key. John, you're so smart. Anyway, so let's talk about Crossy Road and in-app purchases and top grossing lists. And I'm not sure which one of you put this in the show notes, but it was not me.
It was me. We were talking about the financial prospects for Crossy Road, indirectly talking about the financial prospects. And Joe F. was one of the first people to tweet that when we were looking at the top grossing lists, he says those ads won't show up as part of the top grossing. Only in-app purchases will. And I think it's also because that they appear to be third-party ads and not ads through Apple's iAd system. I don't know if you did like Apple's iAds, if that would contribute to your top grossing, but certainly if you're getting paid through a third party for the ads in your thing, that won't contribute. Although it's kind of interesting that Apple doesn't, as far as I know, ask for a 30% cut of ads that you run that are not through Apple.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised they allow that at all. I think the only reason they do is because people were doing ads in their app before iAd existed, and I think Apple just doesn't really care that much about iAd to really force that to be the case. But yeah, it is kind of weird. Like, you can't do a third-party credit card processing thing for in-app purchase, but they allow you to have third-party ads.
Yeah, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Not that that ever happens with Apple and their rules. And then would you like to talk about our friend of the show, Steve Lubitz, and what he had to tell us?
Yeah, so shortly after we recorded last week's show, where we talked a lot about Crossy Road and its monetization strategy, the game has changed a little bit of its monetization strategy, and Steve wrote in with one aspect of that you could buy what they call a coin doubler. You earn coins at a faster rate, and you get a bonus 1,000 coins for $3.99. That's buying the piggy bank. So there is something that doesn't change the gameplay and, sort of getting an extra life or walking on water or slowing down time when the train is coming or anything like that. It changes the monetization. It changes parts of the game that are part of monetization. So when I saw this, I said, okay, this is like a power up. You earn coins faster, right? But what can you do with those coins? You're just, using them to get more chances at the gumball machine to get your characters. And one thing we didn't mention on the last show, speaking of the characters, is that the gumball machine is random, and it doesn't care, like any gumball machine, doesn't care what things you already have. So as you accumulate players from the gumball machine, you'll end up getting duplicates. You get another crazy old Ben for the 15th time. So it's not like you're going to inevitably get all the characters, and I don't even know if the gumball machine vends all of the characters. Some of them may be purchase only. But they added a bunch of new characters. They added a thing where you can try out a new character for a short period of time, and then at the end of that time, they let you buy it at a discounted rate. All sorts of new things are showing up in updates to this thing. They're further emphasizing the thing that was always there, I think, the little share sheet that lets you share like a screenshot of your score and your death. Now that is much more prominent and makes you notice it. It's either more prominent or it didn't exist before. I certainly didn't even know it existed before because I'm not looking for a share button. And now it's more in my face. And not only do I see it in the game, but I see things that other people post. So anyway, the monetization strategy of Crossy Road is fluid and is moving more towards things that are slightly more aggressive about getting you to buy things than it was before. And I don't think that's because the developer is desperate for money, because all of these things are still pretty mild in the grand scheme of things. They're not punitive. It's still entirely, for fun and not, pay to win type of gameplay. Still, even with the coin doubler, nothing affects the actual game, which is avoiding being hit by cars and falling in the water and being hit by trains. If it ever makes that turn, I'm sure we will note it on the program. But I'm pretty confident now, especially with seeing Crossy Road climb the charts, that they're doing just fine with this game.
Yeah, in fact, it's been a pretty big difference. So I would say the changes they're making are working to bring them more money because they've made a pretty large jump in the top grossing chart since last week. Like when we were talking, they were somewhere around the 200 range of top grossing, and now they're like in the 60s. So they whatever they're doing, the changes they're making are working to bring them in more money that's more proportional to the actual downloads they're getting.
I don't know the timing, though. I don't know if they started climbing the charts before or after they rolled out these changes. I don't know the specifics. So it could just be, gaining traction from word of mouth and it's so hard to say. I don't know. Anyway, it's still a good game. You should still check it out.
Tiff is now totally hooked. And
yeah, I hopped over her name earlier.
Yeah, yeah. She's very mad at you for continuing to move your score forward past hers.
I just stopped moving it forward once I became the number one in my Game Center list. So I beat my son's score, I beat Jason's score, and now I haven't really played that much.
Oh goodness, what is your current score?
My score is depressing because I was trying to beat Jason's score. Like I couldn't get him to accept my son's friend request. So maybe he didn't want to accept the request of someone whose score would be above his. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna have to beat it. And his score was like 193. And I got 191, and I had that for a while. And then I got 192, and I had that for a while. And boy, there's nothing worse than seeing yourself die when you're like one hop away from tie and two hops away from, anyway. And then I eventually got 216, and I'm depressed by the 216 because when I got the 216, my death was super stupid. I was just so happy that I had won. It was like, okay, now I don't really need to go any farther, and I could have gone much farther. It was just a stupid death. So I'm kind of off that, and I've gone back to Desert Golf. Golfing.
Yeah, whatever. I still haven't tried that one, but I am enjoying Crossy Road more than I probably should. It is a good game. So we should probably talk about what Daniel Jalkut said about push notification spam filtering. Marco, did you get a chance to read this earlier today?
I read this 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, so what we were talking about last episode and what Daniel was kind of replying to was what especially Marco had talked about with regard to push notification spam. And how the three of us really didn't come up with a terribly awesome way for Apple to filter the spam or take action on the spam. And so one of the things we talked about was, well, maybe they could enlist users to help filter the spam and notify Apple of it. And so Daniel had an interesting point, and I'm going to read from this post that we'll put in the show notes. Apple can still use its unique role as the creator of all things iOS to devise a system through which they would themselves be virtually subscribed to all unremarkable notifications from a particular app's developer. Think about the worst notification spam you've seen. In my experience, it's not super personalized. In fact, it's liable to be an inducement to keep using the app, to advance in a game, to become more engaged, etc. I think Apple would collect a ton of useful information about spammy developers if they simply arranged that every app on this app store is capable of sending push notifications, included among its list of registered devices a pseudo device in Cupertino whose sole purpose was to receive notifications, scan them for spammy keywords, apply Bayesian filters, and flag questionable developers. I think it's a really good idea. That seems like it'd be hard as crap to put together, but it is a very interesting point. I mean, when you are in control of the entire ecosystem, you probably can get away with doing something like that. And I was curious to hear what you guys thought.
See, it's a really good idea. So what he said earlier in the post is like one of the problems is they can't just run these kind of filters server side because everything's encrypted end to end. So in order to see the content of a message, you have to be one of the recipients of the message, and that's actually not entirely true. When you send a push notification request, you send it over SSL. But the server on the other side has the decryption key, and you're just sending a JSON dictionary. So, like, your server is not encrypting that data separately from SSL. That encryption is happening after it gets into Apple's hands. So Daniel's assumption early on is actually not correct, that they could be doing this server side if they wanted to, without having like this big pseudo device. I think there's two problems with it. Number one, it would have to. It would almost certainly be abused and worked around very quickly. For instance, developers could start using different schemes. So, for instance, background refresh, you can just send whatever you want as the payload of a silent notification for background refresh that doesn't show any text to the user. Then you can have your app generate a local notification based on whatever you want that says whatever you want from that. That's actually how I send all of mine. Every Overcast notification is messageless. It is a content available notification, and then the app wakes up, performs a sync, and then for any new podcast episodes it finds, it shows a notification from their title. So all of the text that is being shown to the user in a push notification is not going through Apple servers and will require the app to be launched to generate. And of course, developers would very quickly work around this kind of system if it was in place. They would, just show the text in different ways. They would respond to silent notifications, or they would encrypt the messages and then decrypt them with a custom scheme with the app or whatever. So that method wouldn't entirely work. What would work better, and what would actually be a prerequisite to having that kind of setup at all, is if Apple cared. That's the biggest problem here, is that it really seems like Apple doesn't care about this problem by their complete inaction and complete seeming inability and unwillingness to enforce this rule, and then to even break it themselves with one of their teams. I think it's very clear that Apple simply doesn't think this is a problem, because when Apple thinks something is a problem, it tends to get attention. It tends to get addressed. And then when Apple has kind of this tunnel vision sometimes, where whatever they care about, whatever the hot thing is at that moment, it gets this laser focus. They do crazy things, it gets remade or gets massive progress made on it, and then it gets left alone untouched for 10 years. And I think this is one of those things where like this is an area of the App Store that they just don't care about, like much of the App Store, honestly. I mean, most of the App Store does not see rapid change. The policies sure don't. And I think it's just very clear this is a problem. This is a problem to geeks like us and people who are as picky as me, but Apple does not think this is a problem, because if they thought it was a problem, they would be doing more to enforce the rule, and they're not.
I think is another reason why the Jalkut proposed solution, ignoring encryption, ignoring fake local notifications, stuff like that, even if all those workarounds didn't exist, this would still require Apple to do two things. One thing that Apple doesn't like to do, and one thing that they're not very good at. The thing they don't like to do is this would require them to essentially log all push notifications, right?
Yeah.
And or store them in some way so that you could verify that they were sent for some, they would have to store some window of time. And the reason they would have to store them is because the second thing that I don't think they'd be very good at is figuring out if something is in violation of the guidelines by looking at the content computer-wise, spam detection. And to do that well, it's not easy to do that well and do it fast at the same time. So it's not like they could watch up all the traffic as it goes by, categorize it as spam or not spam, and then discard it, because what if they got it wrong and they want to retrain their filter or whatever? So it would have to be stored for some period of time. So even if they could man in the middle everything, decrypt everything because they control the key servers and all this other stuff, like undo all of their end-to-end encryption, look at the content, great. Now you're looking at all the push and by the way, simulate user activity so that you get the push notifications that are in response to you using the application or not using the application or having used it within a certain period of time, or having, you'd have to do a hell of a lot to make a fake thing that behaves in a way that is sure to trigger all of these spammy push notifications. Then you're just left with a pile of push notifications that you have to look at and determine which ones are legitimate. And that's hard for humans to do. I mean, app reviewers can't even determine if an app is legitimate. And, and you're expecting a computer in a few milliseconds to figure out if a push notification is in violation of the no promotions rule. So that's why I keep coming back to the only solution to this has to involve some kind of reporting by recipients. I have received this spam push notification, report this application, or disable notifications. And maybe I was trying to think of all less intrusive UIs for doing this that wouldn't bother regular people. Maybe when you turn off push notifications for an app, it may ask you if that app has ever sent you push notifications, or if it had sent you a push notification recently, like within the past 5 minutes, it may ask you, are you disabling notifications because this for one of these 5 reasons? And you can say spam, whatever, like some kind of thing like that only some nerd will see, that's heavily gated on the thing that we all do, which is something sends you a notification, you realize you forgot to turn it off, you immediately go to system preferences, whatever the hell they call it on iOS, settings, and it's a gear icon. It's killing me. It's in both places now. And you immediately go to turn it off. And, iOS can detect that sort of pattern and can throw up something that says, kind of like those annoying unsubscribe things, like you've successfully unsubscribed. Did you unsubscribe because, and you never want to answer the questions. Well, if you're angry because something sent you spam, I know I would click the little thing or tap the little thing that says, yeah, I just disabled it because it sent me an ad or something that looked like an ad. And that'll have tons of false positives from people who are just angry they got notifications, period. But the volume of hundreds of millions of iOS users is enough that, they could do these in graphs and say, all right, this looks like a spammy app. Let's maybe investigate it. And have 5 people a week just run that app on their phone and see if it sends them in ads. And, again, talked about this last show. Apple has all the power here. They can totally stop this. Like, they're not powerless to, all they have to do, like Marco said, is care about it a little bit. And then, like, they can at their leisure do almost anything, almost any possible sort of end user solution, really, really lightweight. And their volumes will make it such that it'll become super clear what the popular app that is spamming people is. You're never going to get the obscure app that's spamming people because 7 people have it installed, but you'll get the popular app that's spamming people, and then you send them a nice little note and say, hey, I noticed your app is spamming people. Maybe stop that. And they will stop. And if they don't, their app is gone out of the store. It's just, having such incredible power over everything that's in the App Store, it's just like they're wasting it by not using it for good.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is... as we get into the after discussion, I'm sure I'll bring this up again, but there are so many areas in which they could use this for good. For example, the way the new Twitter app scans URL schemes and maybe process listing, I don't know, but they scan for the apps you have installed, and they send that list of apps that you have installed to Twitter, and Twitter uses that to advertise to you. This is a pretty big privacy violation. People on iOS generally expect... because the way iOS works in most ways is that apps are sandboxed and can't read data from other apps. They can't even see other apps. They can't even tell what you have installed, conceptually at least. In practice, there are 2 ways to tell if you have an app installed. One is if the app registers for any URL schemes, then you can check for those, whether they're registered or not. And the second is there's a low-level, some kind of syscontrol function, something like that. I don't know exactly one it is, but there's a low-level POSIX function to get the list of running process names. And so if you pull that list, on a regular basis, the chances are you're going to catch a lot of apps the user has installed in their currently running state. And so you'll eventually build up a list of what apps they have installed based on their process names. That function, I'm not sure there's a good reason for that to exist on iOS or to return valid data. It wouldn't surprise me if in the future, similar to the way that Apple basically removed MAC address access from those low-level system calls in iOS, I think 7 did that, where the call is still there. You can call it, but it just returns all zeros for a MAC address now. Similar to that, I don't think there's a reason why iOS needs this function to return valid process names to the app that's calling it. There's no XPC that's app controlled or anything like that. So if there's a good reason, please let us know once.
That's not how this works.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, I don't think there's a reason for that. But so I think privacy wise, I think Apple should care about this problem because I think the list of apps you have installed should be considered private information, personal information, that any one app shouldn't be able to get a list of apps on your phone. URL schemes, though, that's a trickier one. So some apps, they have URL schemes in place for various workflow things. There's various reasons why you'd want to have and publish a URL scheme. And if you're going to do that, I guess there's no real way around that, around your app being discovered. On the other hand, there's a lot of apps that have URL schemes in place for other reasons, like some OAuth SDK thing, the Facebook login thing. Like some plugin or component of your app requires some kind of workaround, like where it kicks you to some other app, you sign in, and then it kicks you back to your app. And so you have to have a URL scheme to make that work. And so a lot of apps have URL schemes that really aren't using them for any other purpose besides that sort of thing. iOS 8 and the new extension system makes a whole lot of that unnecessary. So I would actually suggest, and I say this as one of the designers of Xcallback URL, I would suggest that URL schemes possibly be deprecated in the future and removed later after that. I think that there are better ways around that problem that they've designed in iOS 8. If Apple seems to think that it's okay for apps to have a list of 10,000 known URL schemes and scrape all your apps and send them to a server and advertise to you based on that, which is what they're currently permitting Twitter to do, if Apple thinks that's okay, that's going to continue, and that's going to be in every analytics package and every scammy ad package for iOS, and it's going to become very standard of practice for apps to spy on your other apps and report those back to their shady companies. And that's really not good. I really don't like that at all. And so I think as URL schemes become dramatically less necessary with iOS 8, maybe the way forward is not to have them, to remove that possible area of abuse. Secondarily, Apple could just have a rule that they actually enforce that says you can't collect lists of apps from your device and send them to your servers. Like, that could just be a rule. They don't seem to care, though.
Don't you get the feeling, like, again, we have no visibility into what anyone is actually thinking, so we just have to guess in this void of information. But that there's this tiered system in terms of developers. Externally, you're all the same, but internally to Apple, if the Twitter app starts doing something spammy, Apple's reaction, I would imagine, is not to send a generic email from some person that says your app's going to be pulled in 2 weeks if you don't stop doing this, like what they do to other people who, you know what I mean? Instead, someone at much higher level has a nice friendly phone call with someone higher level on Twitter, and they have a discussion about, because it's Twitter, what are they going to do? Pull the Twitter app? I mean, yeah, eventually they would if there was some sort of actual disagreement. I totally believe they would pull the Twitter app, but you get handled a little bit differently when you're Twitter. I mean, I know they pulled Path for pulling all your contacts and everything, but Path was not as big as Twitter. And they're nice to everybody. Like, it's not like they're mean to other people and nice to Twitter, but I just get the feeling, based on nothing other than seeing their actions externally without knowing what's going on in the box, and maybe hearing a little bit about sort of the treatment and who gets picked to, come 2 weeks early and do a demo for a keynote or whatever. Not every developer is treated the same. And I think this is appropriate in general, but it goes against the sort of egalitarian, idealistic story of the App Store where, anybody can play and all the rules are the same for everybody. It's not quite, it doesn't seem like from the outside that it's quite the same for everybody. So I don't, for all we know, Apple has already talked to Twitter and say, we would really prefer you not to get a list of apps. It's not like we're going to pull you from the store. We know you have schedules. Just tell us that in the next version you'll fix this and give us a rough timeline, and we'll say okay. And then we won't say anything about it publicly, and everything will be fine. It's totally plausible to me that could be happening inside Apple, but of course we don't know.
So why don't you tell us about something we do know, Marco?
We do know that we are sponsored this week by a new sponsor. It is Oscar. Oscar is a new kind of health insurance company. They use technology to guide you to better care. It's at hioscar.com/ATP. That's hi, like, hi. hioscar.com/ATP. So most health insurers have, other big corporations as their primary customers, not individuals and families, and it really shows. Oscar only offers plans for individuals and families. They're focused on the needs of the individual. They put people first, and they've transformed health insurance from scary and overwhelming to friendly and simple. Buying health insurance for yourself is a pretty intimidating process. I've gone through it myself a number of times, some of which were before the Affordable Care Act, and let me tell you, that was terrifying. Because before the Affordable Care Act, there were all these risks that you would take that aren't there anymore, where it's like you have to understand all these different numbers and all these different conditions, and you always have to ask yourself, like, well, in which ways could this bankrupt me? Like, fortunately, most of those things are now illegal, but there's still a whole bunch of crazy numbers you got to understand and everything. Oscar makes it as easy as possible. Oscar, they have these clear, honest language around their plans. There's only a few plans to choose from, and they're all pretty much the same plan, just like how much deductible do you want. And they have this beautifully designed website that's easy to use, full of information, and very, very clear. You would not believe how bad other health insurance websites are, unless you've used them, in which case you know exactly what I'm talking about. And Oscar also offers great customer service via phone or email, which, again, is extremely unusual for health insurance companies. Oscar plans include benefits like free checkups, some free generic drugs, free primary care doctor visits, specialists without referrals. You don't have to go to a referral first. Huge time saver. But the coolest benefit that they have, I think, they have a 24/7 doctor on call service. So anytime, day or night, you can request a phone call, and a board-certified practitioner will call you in a few minutes who can help you with many questions and ailments right over the phone, and they can even issue common prescriptions all right over the phone, and that service is free. There's no copay, there's no limit. That service is free for Oscar members. You can get 24/7 doctors on call. That's incredible. Starting in January, Oscar members can receive credit of up to $240 a year for reaching daily walking goals. These goals are tailored to you based on your previous level of activity. If you want to participate in this, Oscar will give you a little wearable thing, and then you track your progress right in their app. Whether you're entirely healthy or you or someone in your family has a complicated medical condition, Oscar's plans will cover you. You can buy their insurance through the new health insurance marketplaces if you're in most of northern New Jersey or the parts of New York that are in and around the city, like Westchester, Rockland, Suffolk, Nassau. So check their website to see if they cover you. Again, that's most of northern New Jersey and metro New York. hioscar.com/ATP will show you more about that and let you just type in a zip code. You can get a quote in like 2 seconds. You just type in like your zip code and your age, basically, and that's it. Because of the way the healthcare marketplaces work, you can only sign up from now through February. So hurry up. There's these tiered deadlines. So if you sign up in the next couple days by December 15th, you can get insurance for January 1st. If you sign up by January 15th, you'll get insurance for February 1st. Hurry up if you're into this. This is not the kind of thing you want to delay on. If you need to buy health insurance for yourself and or your family, this is a great way to do it. Oscar is a novel approach to an industry that hasn't been innovative in decades. To learn more about their plans or to get a quote, visit hioscar.com/ATP or call. They have a special number just for ATP listeners, 1-844-OSCAR-98. So thanks a lot to Oscar for sponsoring our show. Man, buying health insurance does suck.
It sucks even if you're employed at a regular job like John and I are. It's still a pain in the butt.
So the self-employed thing is definitely more difficult and usually more expensive. But the one big downside of employer provided is that you usually have little or no choice. So you don't get to shop around. What if I like the Oscar and think it's awesome? Well, tough luck. You could, you can't forego the employer funded one because it's always so much cheaper because they contribute some money to it. But you have so few choices.
You should grit your job.
Yeah.
All right. So anyway, we're still not happy with the App Store, are we, Marco?
I thought we were past all this. I really did. There was a time when the App Store first came out, and over the first couple of years it was out, we had a bunch of bumpy rejections from Apple figuring out its policies, developers figuring out what Apple wanted, Apple at first being pretty bad about communicating their policies and then later getting less bad at it. Overall, App Review is a good idea. Overall, I support App Review, and overall, I think it has benefited customers and developers and Apple. But there are still these dark patches, and there are still times when it seems like Apple is a little bit too, maybe I wouldn't necessarily say power hungry, but they seem to be too strictly or overreaching in their rule enforcement in a way that doesn't seem to benefit anybody, possibly even including Apple. That they're not seemingly looking out for any kind of clear user benefit. They're not there's no major reason why, at least that we can see, why Apple needs to enforce certain rules or wants to enforce certain rules. And there are a lot of rules they enforce that are unwritten. And this is the biggest problem. This is one of the things that's going on now around these notification center widgets. And there seems to be this disconnect. These are two different parts of Apple, two very, very distantly separated parts of Apple. So on one end, you have Craig Federighi and his organization making the software and making the SDKs and adding these great abilities to the OSs. But developer relations and all parts of developer relations, including App Review, are all buried deeply in Phil Schiller's organization. So these are very separate parts of Apple. And I think what we're seeing here, we've seen some speculation over the last couple of days from a couple of blogs. In fact, I'm a Stratechery member, Ben Thompson's site, Stratechery. I'm one of his premium members, so I get his daily updates, and I highly recommend these daily updates. They're extremely good. He is one of the smartest writers in our business right now, and he wrote one today, basically saying, saying along with a few other things I've seen recently that it sure seems like maybe there's some friction here between Schiller's organization and Federighi's organization. And I don't know enough about it to say any more than that, but I think looking from the outside, it does certainly seem like these two different parts of Apple are not on the same page on everything. And something is going wrong there. There's some kind of friction or communication breakdown or different priorities. Something is going wrong there because we have the massive, as we said this past summer at WWDC, the massive love letter to developers that Apple basically had this past summer, saying, look at all this great new stuff, all these walls we're lifting, all these things you thought we'd never do, well, we did them. All these things you thought your apps could never do, now you can do them. Now, months later, after this stuff is out and in consumers' hands and these OSs are out and people actually start trying to do things with them, we're seeing so many problems and rejections from the app review side of things. Oh, and by the way, also a third division is the App Store editorial team, which is under Eddie Q. So you have the people who make the SDKs, the people who pick which apps are featured to be like great examples of what apps should be doing, and then the people making the policies of actually enforcing those rules. Those are all three different organizations under three different SVPs inside Apple, and who apparently have different viewpoints on things.
Well, I don't know if you could say that the development is in conflict with any of those other two. You could say that App Review and App Store editorial are at best just not communicating with each other and doing embarrassing things. But engineering, like, their responsibility is, in cooperation with whatever their, sort of product design thing, or, whoever's designing what the product's going to do. Engineering's job is to, implement it. And maybe, I don't know if the product design is under that umbrella, but probably. Anyway, they create the APIs. And every API they create, there's some expectation is like, we're just going to make something possible. But although you may be able to do a thing with these APIs, for example, read all the context and email them to your server, like the people who made those APIs, it's not their fault that you can do that. It's like, we're going to implement these features. We're going to make these APIs that make features possible. I don't know if, I don't think Craig Federighi sees it as his responsibility to worry about, and whatever APIs we make. Obviously, some developer is going to use those APIs to do something that App Review is going to reject. And that does not necessarily imply a conflict between Craig Federighi and the App Review section of the organization. I don't think he would say that he sees it as his role to make those decisions, because they aren't his decisions. There are features that they want developers to be able to add to their products that are made possible by his APIs. There are also things that people can do with the APIs that the engineering side makes that are going to be against App Review, and that is the way it's always been. Anecdotes about like, well, I showed this to an engineer in the in the labs at WWDC, and they thought it was awesome. Yeah, they probably do think it's awesome, but again, they know they're not in charge of App Review, and they're excited to see someone using their API to do something cool. But I still don't think that it implies a conflict between engineering and the rest of the organization. I think the only thing we can say for sure is the embarrassing lack of communication between editorial and App Review in terms of promoting an application and then pulling it while it's under promotion. Like, that's the type of thing that shouldn't happen if those things communicate with each other better. So there could be a conflict between engineers. It's a natural, like, we're geeks out here, and we're like, if something is possible and we can't think of a reason why we shouldn't do it, it should be allowed. And that's sort of a sort of Apple engineer's mindset. A true engineer's mindset would be like, well, the Linux thing. If it's possible, everyone should be allowed to do it. It's free, anarchy for all. The Apple mindset, if it's possible, and if we think about it and we can't think of a reason to stop it, then it should be possible. So it's probably true that if you were to poll the entire organization, the vast majority of the people who work in engineering in Apple would say, yes, that should be possible. And no, I would never pull the pcalc, thing for putting a calculator in the Today view. But, I'm hesitant to turn it into a vice president versus vice president internal turf war type battle.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm careful to say that it's under these people's organizations. I mean, there's we don't know if Schiller is involved with these decisions personally, or if Federighi is mad about these decisions personally, or anything like that. But what we can clearly see is that these parts of Apple are not working together correctly. It's so bad that it's leaking out, that it's publicly visible.
I mean, but do you think, like I said, I don't know, I think this is the correct working of engineering and App Review, and that engineering makes the APIs and App Review decides if the things developers are using them for are allowed. Our complaint is that App Review is making decisions that we don't agree with.
Right, and that conflict with editorial.
Yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, that could just, I'm willing to chalk that up to lack of communication. Well,
but that's a pretty big thing, because, see, and this is coming at a particularly bad time for Apple, because right now, in this time, late 2014, the last couple weeks of 2014, the Apple Watch is coming out soon. iPad sales are not that great. It is harder than ever to make money in the App Store, and Android is massive. And Android just released a major update, the whole paper thing, or whatever they call it, material design, all like the Android 5.0, that's actually getting pretty good reviews from people. So what we have is, Apple is enforcing all these rules. They've been enforcing all these rules for years, and they have this crazy position of power because there was really no other place to go if you wanted to make any reasonable money developing apps. I mean, some people make money on Android. It's possible to, but it's historically been harder. As hard as you think it is on iOS to make money, it's historically been even harder on Android. And a lot of things just weren't as good on Android. But that gap is closing, and I'm not sure it ever will close. Period. I don't think it will anytime soon, but it's a lot smaller than it's ever been before. Meanwhile, at the exact same time, you have the iPad not doing particularly well, relative to how it was doing. You have immense competition in the App Store that drives prices way, way down and makes it very hard to make any money. And you have this new platform, the Watch, that you're expected to develop for in parallel. And this is combining to make it a tougher sell than it previously has been to be an iOS developer. You have now more platforms you need to target. There's more work for you to do. You might have to do adaptive layout to make resizable iPad apps if that ever ships, like we talked about before. So there's more and more work to be like a current, up-to-date, responsible iOS developer. There's more and more work than there's ever been before. The alternative of Android development is less bad than it used to be relative to iOS development. And you're making less money on iOS than you ever made before. This is not a good time for Apple to add more reasons for developers to become disillusioned with the platform. This is strategically a really terrible time for that, because Apple needs fantastic developers to do two big things for it. It needs good developers to push the boundaries to make the iPad a better general computing device than it is, and it needs developers to make great apps for this new watch coming out in the spring. And on some level, there's always going to be more developers. You can always say, well, there's more people waiting. When you guys all leave, more people will come in. There's always going to be a fresh batch. Like the entertainment industry, lots of industries work that way. That's true. But if you want the best developers making the best apps, and if you want the boundaries to be pushed, if you want, what Apple said in WWDC, they said on a number of occasions, we can't wait to see what you do with this stuff. And then they see what we do with it, and they tell us, "Oh, you can't do half of that."
As long as you do what they want you to do.
Right. I mean, they need good developers to push the boundaries and to make fantastic software that is sustainable and that takes advantage of the platform and that pushes it and makes it useful for people, and it makes people buy their devices and stick with their ecosystem. They need us right now more than their actions say.
Yeah, if we had to pick out things that are in conflict, it's not that that engineering is conflict with any of the non-engineering parts, but it's the broad trends within Apple in sort of the post-Jobs era is that in the recent years, and especially in this most recent year, 2014, engineering's reorganization, which is has gone through a lot of growing pains and change of leadership, and Steve Jobs goes and Forstall goes, and things are realigned under new people, and Johnny Ive is elevated and all that stuff. All of that rejiggering has culminated in an engineering organization that, like you said, Marco, and like I said in my Yosemite review and everything, an engineering organization that does things that previously it had refused to do, but that had been widely, desired by their constituent developers and indirectly by their customers. That is the overall trend in engineering in the last year or so. And it's the result of all these. You have to think it's the result of all these reorganizations that whoever was opposing this is either not in power, not in the company anymore, or lost an argument, right? And now suddenly engineering is doing things that are directly beneficial to developers and indirectly beneficial so far to customers, because customers wanted these things too. Whereas App Review has not undergone, as far as I know, such an organizational change, and is instead acting the way it has always acted, sort of in cycles, where a lot of the time it's dormant and sleeping, and then sometimes the bear wakes up and bites you. And we've had fits of that. It's gone in cycles. And why is it awake now? Why is it sleeping other times? Hard to say. But one thing you can say is it has not undergone the same transformation that the engineering organization has gone through. Its App Store is not suddenly letting in things that it previously didn't let in. It is not suddenly being more reasonable, being more transparent, explaining itself better. Like, the only thing you can say for the App Review organization is that they have cut down on wait times, that consistently the trend has been, don't have ridiculous wait times for things. with a few bumps in the road for like releases where the Mac apps have to be delayed forever and stuff like that. But
usually it's about a week still, and it's you'll be able to say like it's about a week for like the last 5 years.
Right. So like the overall trend, like if you look at the entire history of the App Store, is that they have moved that metric to be sort of better in a way that developers like and that indirectly benefits customers, which is the same sort of yardstick I was using in engineering. And so it's all the more glaring when engineering is suddenly doing things that seem, that everyone would have said are no-brainer, doing them in a cautious way, doing them in a good Apple way, but making positive progress where we say, iOS 8 is better for developers than iOS 7 was, and so on and so forth. Whereas App Review just does not seem to be making any progress. And I'm not familiar with the internal organization of App Review or that side of the organization, but if it has undergone any sort of transformation or change in leadership that sort of parallels the engineering one, I'm not aware of it. And if it hasn't undergone that, then that entire organization looks to me like a typical corporate organization with people who are in power, who are stubborn, who are wrong, and who can't be convinced by their underlings, right? Like, and you're just stuck. It's like, well, I disagree with you, and I'm your boss. The end.
The other interesting thing, to go back just a half step to what Marco was saying, is that not only are developers feeling like we got a little bit of a bait and switch from WWDC, because I believe, Marco, you did, and I know I wrote blog posts on the way back from WWDC about how, we finally got all the things we've been asking for. We finally got all the things we wanted. And, it's so, I don't remember who it was that said it first, but it's like Lucy and Charlie Brown with the football, and so here it is. We got all the things we want. Oh, just kidding. And so developers are obviously furious, but a lot of users that I speak to, just regular people who are not developers, they're getting more and more frustrated with Apple too. It started with Apple Maps being crap and Google Maps not being available. And then it continued to buggy iOS 7 that all of a sudden looks different. And people keep telling me how iOS 8 is buggy. And to be honest, I haven't really had any particular issues. But that being said, it seems like a lot of people I know who used to be really into all things Apple maybe aren't. And that's a tough place to be. And so here it is. Apple is in a position where they really shouldn't be pissing off their developers, not only for the developers' sake, but also for users' sake.
Do you see do you have any non-geeky user friends who talk to you about applications? Are you just talking about like the luster of Apple's gone off, or are you talking about users who notice that Transmit can't send things to iCloud Drive anymore?
No. The former, where the luster, how it's always infallible, they always work.
But that luster goes in cycles too. That's just the typical, celebrity type, build them up, tear them down. And like, I don't attach anything particular to that, because I mean, the cycle for that is practically yearly at this point. Yearly, everybody loves Apple, and yearly, everybody hates it. Like, it seems to be getting faster,
Oh, yeah. Although, to be fair, one thing that does definitely impact customers is when an app is approved with a certain feature, they buy it, they use that feature, and then they have to remove that feature because of Apple's policy after the fact.
Well, that's why I was asking. I was asking if people notice that. Like, do they read the release notes? Do they just get mad at the developer? Like, does that blame even land on Apple? Or do the type of features that get removed in that way, are they below the notice of people? Because the feature that was removed from Transmit, people who use Transmit are already probably kind of geeky, and maybe they read the release notes. I'm trying to think if there's like a mass market example, like if the Facebook app could do something that everybody thought was great and then Apple removed it, maybe that would get some notice. But I have never heard any person who uses iOS complain to me that an app was updated and a feature was removed.
I have, but it was not at all because of Apple. Everyone I know is furious about you not being able to send messages in the standard Facebook app anymore. And you have to download a different Facebook Messenger app in order to send messages.
Oh, yeah, no, I remember that, yes. And that was, and that blame landed on Facebook, and that totally was Facebook, because they decided to split their own stupid app, so whatever. But, yeah, I guess they would notice that, because that's a sort of cutting an application in half into two pieces. But for features that are banned because of App Store rules, I don't know. Like, I mean, it may just be the people I come in contact. It's not that big of a deal. Like, again, a lot of these issues are magnified for us because of the circles we travel in. The Apple losing its luster type thing is more likely a tertiary effect of what Marco was talking about, where it's like Apple needs developers to help drive its platform forward, and developers are trying to drive it forward, and every time they go, take a step too far, Apple, snaps the whip and says, "Whoa, not that far. We don't want you to make this app too useful."
Right.
Like, but we have to think about this for 6 months or 9 months, or we have some senior VP who really thinks we should never ever do that. So we're never going to let you do that. It's like, how do you become gun shy? You become, sort of like, there's many articles from developers expressing their reservations about using new APIs. Like, even in best case, it's just like, let's lay off this new API for a year and see how many people invest in it for a year and get their app rejected. And then maybe we'll get the lay of the land and sort of divine with chicken bones and other, dice and stuff and figure out, I think this will probably be okay. We'll work on this for 6 months and see. Like, it's making developers more cautious when really they should be blazing their way forward and making apps that, like the stupid line, the apps that Apple hasn't even thought of before. Show us your amazing apps. It's just like, you get the feeling that in some Apple executive's mind, they're like, make amazing apps exactly the way I'm envisioning in my mind that I'm not going to tell you about. Yeah, I have a picture in my mind of what an amazing app would be like. I'm not going to tell you what that picture is. Go make it, and if you don't, I'm going to reject your app. Like, that's it. It's a chilling effect on development, and so like, if customers are going to notice anything, it's going to be this multi-year delayed thing from developers being more cautious to use APIs and then bring out apps later and without more interesting features. And all you need is, I was thinking of, Marco already brought this up, but like, what does it take for someone to switch? What does it take for someone to say, well, screw this, I'm going to develop for Android now? They need to be able to make money doing it, and some structural issues probably need to be sorted out so they become less of a deterrent. Like, for an iOS developer, even with all the devices that are out there now, you have to think fragmentation and installed base of the most recent version are a huge drag on switching over to Android, because you just have to wait for so long for, the 5.0 to be everywhere, and then you have to deal with so many more devices. You have to wait for some sort of consolidation.
Well, but even that is not nearly as bad as it used to be, though. Like, they did this crazy thing. I don't know the crazy details of it, but they did this crazy thing a couple of years ago where they started bundling all the APIs together into the Google Play services, which can self-update.
I was thinking like hardware fragmentation in terms of screen sizes and CPU and GPU combinations, stuff like that. Again,
it's a problem for really just games. Like, for apps, it's a lot less of a problem because the GPUs stop mattering as much for apps than games.
Well, I know, but like, the reason I'm not just thinking of games. What I'm thinking of is in terms of what kind of applications are going to drive the platform forward and do amazing things that no one had ever thought of. And those are always the ones that push the system. And it's easier right now. It's easier to make those on iOS because you have a better idea of what you're going to be aiming at, and the installed base is on a more recent version. So if you're going to do something amazing and advanced, you can make more money doing it on iOS, and it will be easier. What will it take for those people to bail and go to Android and try to do the same thing? Because that's what you don't want to happen, is someone to come up with a new app idea that hasn't existed. Let's take BitTorrent as an example, because like, pretend BitTorrent didn't exist and someone came up with that idea and all our phones were, this is a terrible idea because it would kill your battery. But anyway, some type of application that does something that would not be allowed in the App Store, but that has a user benefit. Like, users really like this application, and this application would not be possible on iOS, and it happens to land on Android first. And everybody's like, well, I would get an Apple phone, but only Android has insert whatever this killer app is. That's Apple's worst nightmare. Like, if Twitter came out today and was only available in Android because Apple didn't allow like SMS access or some crazy thing that, whatever. You want to have that app. You want to have, like, even if it's something as stupid as Flappy Bird, and even though I'm sure that was on Android too and everything, like, you want to be the platform where the great new thing happens. And you can't plan for the great new thing, and you don't know where it's going to come from, and you don't know who's going to make it, and you don't know when it's going to appear. But you do know that the more you restrict your platform, the higher the chances that this thing will appear only someplace else.
Well, and it has a lot to do with also who is using your platform. Like somebody in the chat pointed out, it was High Endian in the chat pointed out, like, a lot of times the gotta have it apps that are only on one platform, a lot of times that's not because of technological limitations. It's because the developer happened to use that platform, or the most early adopters are on that platform. And for the most part, that platform today is iOS, and it has been iOS for a while. I think since the iPhone was launched, it's been iOS. But that's not guaranteed to always be the case. Like, Instagram launched on iOS first because that's just what you did in 2010 or whenever it launched. Today, I don't think anything would launch Android first, but it would be increasingly difficult for a service to get really big and be iPhone only today, because the expectation gets higher every year that you should be on both of those platforms at the same time. I'm still fine being iOS only because I'm just one guy and I'm not trying to take over the world and make $1 billion from Facebook stock. But I couldn't recommend to like a big VC-backed company that wants explosive growth. I couldn't recommend to them that you should go iOS only necessarily. I think at this point you got to have both, and it's only a matter of time. Once we've reached this point where we can say, well, you really should be looking at both platforms. It's only a matter of time before something big happens on Android first. And I don't think we're near that point yet. I think we're still a few years off from that being very likely. But the direction we're going, that will eventually happen. And I don't think Apple really cares about that. Or that I think they're in denial, or I think either they don't think it will happen, or they don't think it will be very important. And I think they're wrong on both of those if they're making those assumptions.
Well, the other thing Apple has going for it in that area, and it seems to be their strategy so far, this is, kind of a game consoles analogy, is that they just got to sell a lot of consoles. Like, no matter how annoying your platform is, one knob they can always turn is, let's just sell a bazillion friggin' iOS hardware devices, right? Because if we need to keep selling those, because if we don't sell enough of those, it'll be like Windows Phone and it won't make anything for us. And we just need to maintain within some kind of striking distance of Android's market share so that it doesn't become that big of a deal. Because if Apple had 15% market share, wouldn't matter how awesome their platform is, wouldn't matter how permissive their app review rules are, they'd be like Windows Phone. It would be like, yeah, that's nice, whatever. You have some good developers, you make some good apps, but it's not enough. So they need to make good hardware and sell a lot of it. And so far they've been doing pretty good on that. So it's giving them the room to screw up in app review without as many consequences, because it's just like, well, like I said with Android, no matter how annoying it is, Android has such massive market share that if you are going to be one of the biggest companies in the world, you have to address it, because it doesn't matter how bad Android is, you just have to. It's like, it's more than half the market. You got to go do it. And Android Apple is only a contender because it's got a lot of market share, a big market share, and it's perceived as being better and having customers who are more willing to spend money and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, Apple definitely has a larger share of the most desirable customers for most people right now, and they have for a while. But I think the percentage share of that goes down every year for Apple. I don't know that for sure. I'm just guessing. And I still think they have a pretty healthy lead. But again, it's like if you look at the sum of all of this, of why somebody would develop for iOS only or first, there used to be a lot of very strong reasons. There were a bunch of apps out there. There were a bunch of this is where people look to get apps. There was a bunch of money to be made potentially. All the early adopters use this platform. You personally use this platform. You like this platform. There's so many great things you can do only on this platform, or easiest on this platform. All of those advantages, or at least most of those advantages, still exist today. All of them are weaker though than they used to be. Every time Apple does a chilling effect kind of thing, like with App Review, it drops that barrier lower and lower and lower. And again, it's a slow progression. No single one of these factors is like totally collapsing suddenly. They're all just lowering slowly over time. And I fear that that this is going to catch Apple by surprise if one day there starts to be some spillover and Apple just misses it, or they didn't see it coming, and then what happens after that? Like, what happens when a few prominent iOS developers really do switch to Android and really start making really good stuff on Android and not on iOS? I don't think we're very far away from that happening. I think that starts to happen this coming year, and I don't know what happens after that. But I think the barriers that Apple built around itself are substantially lower and weaker than I think Apple thinks they are.
You think in the next year someone's prominent developer is going to bail?
Definitely, yeah.
Like who? I don't think so. I mean,
I think with the watch coming, that's a lot to distract people.
I agree.
That happened with the iPad. I remember like right before the iPad came out was when the Nexus 1 came out, and a whole bunch of iOS developers were like, oh man, the Nexus 1, that's kind of interesting. And then Google sent a bunch of them for free, so a lot of people, including me, I should disclose. And I started thinking, I wonder if I should make Instapaper's website work better on this. Maybe eventually I'll make an app for it someday. And then Apple announced the iPad like a month later, and then we all got distracted by the iPad for 3 years. that might happen with the watch. Maybe Apple's banking on that. Maybe Apple's assuming that will happen with the watch. I'm not entirely sure it will. I think, first of all, WatchKit in year one is going to be pretty limited in what you can even do with it and what kind of apps even make sense to have a watch app. Not to mention, if you think Apple is being, controlling and arbitrary and capricious with the App Store rules with Today widgets, you haven't seen anything yet. Because wait till the watch comes out and they start denying apps for that, for things that we consider invalid or stupid reasons, or they start enforcing inconsistent rules for that. Believe me, there's going to be a lot of that going on. It's like, I'm actually honestly a little, and there's another thing too. I think a lot of developers are going to draw that same conclusion, and they're going to see the stuff that Apple's pulling now with the iOS 8 things and Today widgets and stuff, and they're going to look at this new SDK we got with WatchKit and be like, well, should I really spend the next 3 months developing a WatchKit thing, or should I just wait and see how the market shakes out? Because we're going to see a whole bunch of app review BS, next spring when this comes out. We're going to see a lot of app review BS over the first few months.
Yeah, but when the watch first comes out, though, there's the gold rush, like you said, with the iPad. If you're one of the first apps available that does X on the watch, you get a massive leg up on everybody else. You always want to be there when a new device, especially a new category of device, like the iPad, like the iPhone. So I don't think that's going to dissuade many people who think they have a shot at being there on launch. Maybe,
but again, though, there's not a whole lot you can do with the WatchKit apps quite yet.
It doesn't matter. You can charge 99 cents for your app that has watch integration, and you get 99 cents or 70, whatever, 69.9. Yeah.
Well, it's not really that cut and dry, though, right? Because you need to have a standalone app first in order to have a WatchKit app, and presumably many of the WatchKit apps will be built upon standalone apps that presumably you've already paid for, unless you pull a Tweety too. I don't know. In any case, let's talk about something else that's really cool.
It's Backblaze. We are sponsored once again by Backblaze, our friends that are in the online backup business. Now, let me tell you about online backup. You need this. Your family needs this. Everyone you know needs this. Casey needs this. John needs this. Everybody needs this. Let me tell you, you need online backup. It's amazing because there are so many catastrophes, minor disasters, problems that can happen that can take out your data on your computer and any drives that are physically connected to it, or any drives that are in your house with it. Things like fires, floods, power surges, theft, all sorts of problems that can happen that would take out your data with it. Even just like human error sometimes. Like that's, there's a lot of human error you can do. Like if your backup is a RAID array, you're so screwed. Remember, RAID is not a backup. Anyway, so you want online backup. Trust me. When you go, if you're visiting your family this holiday season, if you see, your parent or grandparent or sibling's computer without online backup, give them the gift of installing Backblaze for them. So online backup is really, really important. If to use John Gruber's words, if you don't have it, you're nuts. You should really, really get online backup. And Backblaze is by far the best one that I have tried. And I used it long before they were a sponsor of the show. I've been using it for years. I tried 2 other ones recently and was very disappointed in both of them for my network drive needs. Believe me, Backblaze is the one you want. Backblaze is unlimited and unthrottled, and you get it for just $5 a month. So literally, this unlimited disk space, no matter how much you have, to combine between me and Tiff, I think we have something like 6 terabytes now in Backblaze. It's a lot. Unlimited disk space, $5 per month per computer. Backblaze is amazing. They have iOS and Android apps to access and share all your backed up files, so you can access your files on the go. You can do single file restores if you want. If you're like on a laptop and you forgot a file at home and you're on vacation somewhere, you can get to your files that way. Backblaze runs natively on your Mac. It is not like a weird Java app or anything. It's a native Mac OS X app founded by ex-Apple engineers. Runs native on your Mac, runs native on Yosemite. They're always up to date with new OS releases. I've never had Backblaze break on me with an upgrade. There's no add-ons, there's no gimmicks, there's no extra charges. Really, $5 a month for unlimited, unthrottled, fully native online backup for the Mac. It really is the simplest online backup program to use. Just install it and it does the rest. So really, this holiday season, go to your loved ones, install Backblaze. Someday they will thank you for that. Maybe not immediately. They're going to wonder what you're doing immediately. Someday they will thank you for that. Thanks a lot to Backblaze for sponsoring our show once again.
All right. Any other thoughts on the App Store stuff before we move along?
There's always, it's like follow-up. It's like there's always going to be thoughts on the App Store. Never-ending pit of thoughts.
my final thought, I think, is that it's within Apple's power, and they have done it before, to smooth over the worst of these misfires by talking directly to the affected developers until they're roughly satisfied. And that is simultaneously the best and the worst thing that can happen. It's the best thing in that people come out of it happy. We get the features we want. Everyone comes to a compromise. Everyone walks away satisfied. It's the worst thing that could happen, and then it doesn't address the structural problem which causes these bear attack flare-ups from App Review and has for years and years. So I don't know if we should just be hoping for a larger crisis, which will become a crisitunity for us for Apple to actually fix the problems that ail it, or we should be hoping for the bad decisions to be reversed and to go back to the sleeping bear.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I don't know. It seems like such a silly problem to have, but whatever. Speaking of silly problems to have, let's talk about time commitments. And I wanted to talk about a couple things. First is Fast Text is not for sale anymore.
What?
I pulled it today.
There goes your M3.
I know, right?
Tens of people a day are going to be disappointed by this.
That'd be a good day. Now, I pulled it for a handful of reasons, and there's a point here, but it's going to take me a second to get there. I pulled it because...
Acquihire?
Yeah, that's totally it. I pulled it because I feel like I'm kind of kidding myself in thinking that I'm going to find the time to get it updated for iOS 7. And given that we're already months into iOS 8, that's kind of getting ridiculous. I'm getting to the point that I'm feeling guilty every time I do see a sales day of more than 0, which is most days, although if it's more than 5, I'm doing a happy dance. I'm feeling guilty about selling someone something that's so dated and knowing deep down in my heart of hearts that the likelihood of me updating it is not good. And as John Chigi assumed in the chat, I'm really getting over that being a joke now. And to be honest, it deserves to be a joke. It is kind of ridiculously funny. And it's absurd that we are on iOS 8 and I have not yet updated for iOS 7. But in the end of the day, it occurred to me that it's really serving no good purpose. It served its purpose, which was for me to prove to myself that I could get something in the App Store, and I did. And I am still proud of that accomplishment, but I'm no longer really proud of the way the app is today. And it's a little better on my phone because I've updated most of the issues for iOS 7 and 8. I still have a couple of lingering bugs that I haven't had time to look at. And I was talking to Aaron about it earlier today. I can't imagine a time where I'm going to look at her, and now we're getting a little into analog territory, but I can't imagine a time where I'm going to look at her and say, you know what, rather than spending time with you and Declan, let me go and hole myself up in the office and fight with Autoleo.
That is a bar that you can apply to almost anything else in life and decide that it's something that you shouldn't do. But anyway, why not just leave it there and have it be free?
I could, but then it's still going to be, oh, haha, you still haven't updated it yet. And I'm over that because it's true and ridiculous. Like, I'm grumpy about it, I think, because I know it's true. Like, if it was like the who the hell is Casey joke, I still find that kind of funny because it's so hopefully not really true anymore. And so I've gotten past it. But
you're more famous than us now.
I don't know about that. But anyway, but in this case, it is true. And that's just, I'm feeling super guilty about it.
Have you done a lot of open source development or contributing to open source projects?
Not really. I mean, I have Camel out on GitHub, which I actually wanted to talk about as well. But in terms of contributing to like massive open source projects, I haven't, mostly because the couple times I have, and Pigeon is an example, which is the multi-protocol IM client, or library, if nothing else. This is the library that runs Adium, Adium, whatever you call it, on the...
Adium.
Yeah, that. On the Mac.
Is that the name of the library? I thought it was libpurple. It was the AIM library, and Pigeon is the client.
You are correct. It's libpurple, and Pigeon is the client. You're absolutely right. Anyways, I looked into contributing to... I actually may not have even been libpurple. It might have been Adium. And I started looking at this code and went, I have no idea what the hell's going on here. And I found that in a couple of open source projects I've briefly considered contributing to, the code was so crazy complex that, and I feel like I'm pretty good at what I do, but it was so esoteric and wild that I realized it was not even worth jumping in. And so I haven't really contributed to any established open source projects now.
I bring that up because in this implied time commitments of open source projects, which is the subheading here under this topic, what I was thinking of is my open source projects that I started myself or published somewhere or contributed to that I did years and years ago, and most of them are all still out there, and they are far worse off than fast text, believe me. They are far, like things that I haven't worked on in a decade or more, and were never very good because they were written by, the much younger version of myself, right? And I mean, before I even get into the time commitment things, like that, there's code out there with my name on it that is terrible that I'm embarrassed by, but I don't pull it because it's like, that's sort of part of the open source thing. It's like, I write the source code, I put it up there, and it's free for anyone to grab and use. Am I working on it? No. Am I adding features? No. Am I fixing bugs? That's a bigger discussion, but it's super low priority, but it would never occur to me to take it down, even, and maybe it's like Casey said, where like he doesn't have enough distance from it, either like the "who is Casey" thing, where it's not true, or you feel that these complaints are founded. If someone complained to me that one of my CPAN modules is a piece of crap, I would agree with them, as Casey seems to agree that FastText, is out of date at this point. But it wouldn't drive me to pull it. I would I don't think I have. I don't think there is an implied commitment for me to continue to maintain for free this open source code that I wrote in 1997, right?
I mean, although to be fair, the context is different of having an app in the App Store versus having a CPAN module available.
But if it's free, but if it's for charge, I understand that, because you're charging people money, you feel bad about that. But if it's free, then, it's exactly like the open source code and in the sense that like, well, whatever, you get what you paid for. You didn't like it, it was a crappy app, delete it from your phone. You didn't pay a dime for it, right? If you don't like the software, it looks cruddy to you, and you download it, delete it from your disk. Fine. It's the same type of thing. And the reason Casey said he was pulling it is because he felt bad or guilty when people would complain that the app wasn't updated. And it's like, yeah, the app's not updated. I'm not doing fast text anymore. But fast text that I did do is there. If it stops working on iOS, then yeah, pull it or mark it as only working on the older version. Like eventually it will age out if you don't modify it, right? Unlike most open source software, because Unix never changes. Like it'll more or less continue to work, right? Or if it doesn't, people just stop complaining about it. But anyway, that's how I feel about my older projects, is that I feel the same way as Casey does, embarrassed by them, embarrassed by their not being updated. And I feel the same way about future putting more time into it. Am I going to? No, because I have many other things that I'm doing with my time these days. But my decision, given all of those things, is not to pull it, but just to leave it there, festering, I guess, on the internet.
No, I mean, like I totally get this. I mean, I went through some of the same things with Bugshot. Bugshot does not work on the new iPhones for some reason, and I don't even know why. I never really looked into I haven't spent 5 minutes on it. It could be a 5-minute fix. I don't know. The reason why it doesn't work is less important than the reason why I'm not working on it, which is that it made no money, basically no money. It made, I think, $3,500, the vast majority of which was the very first month.
That's no money? Oh, you're adorable.
No, well...
Let me tell you how much money my CPAN modules have made.
Let me tell you how much money FastText has made. I don't think But
I win. I win at $0.
You do. But I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I don't want to lie. But I am extraordinarily confident it's less than $1,000, and I'm pretty confident it was at or less than $500 over the course of, I think, 4 years it's been in the store.
Okay, well, regardless, I feel like a jerk, but it made that amount of money up front, and then it just stopped making money. Like it was down to, and I remember there was even a brief time when we were comparing Bugshot to FastText sales, and they were fairly comparable. So it had a good month, and then it was over. So the fact is, it didn't work on iOS 8 on these new devices, and whether it's the OS or the devices, I don't even know. It wasn't even worth spending 15 minutes on, because if I'm going to make Bugshot continue as a product, I would want to do a proper update to it for iOS 8, which would mean full photo library integration so that you could, for instance, annotate a screenshot and then delete it from your camera roll, which you can't do in the current version because you couldn't do that with the old SDK. Things like be an extension so that you could, that they have the photo editing extension type. Why isn't Bugshot a photo editing extension? So like I would want to do that to it. I would want to make it like a proper updated app if I'm going to keep it in the store and keep it working and keep it running as a product. And the fact is, it just doesn't make enough money. It never made enough money to make that really worth doing. And so when I look at how do I want to spend this time, which is what you were saying, which I'm getting back to, when you look at like, how do I want to spend this evening of coding fixing Bugshot, which should really be, at least a couple of weeks of coding to really do what I would want with it. So, do I want to spend the next 2 weeks of coding time fixing Bugshot or improving Overcast, which is making money and which is, seemingly a more deserving source of my time? Or if I'm throwing around 2 weeks of coding time, should I even try a whole different app? Maybe some crazy thing for the watch. Should I try a whole new product to give that a chance to succeed? So I made the decision. It was not worth me putting any more time into it. I didn't want to put any more time into it because it simply wasn't interesting and it wasn't going to pay off. And the things I wanted to do with it were never going to be worth doing with it. And so Casey, first of all, I feel like a jerk for ever making fun of you now. But second of all,
but it was deserved. Well, deserved is maybe a poor choice of words, but it was accurate.
It was. I mean, it wasn't meant to be insulting. It was meant to be funny, But so now I feel like a jerk, and I'm sorry. But I don't want to make you feel bad. But I totally understand what you're saying, which is like you can't foresee a time where you're going to choose to spend your time doing that instead of anything else with your work or family. And I get that. I totally get that. Like, if that's your reason, I totally support it because I've made those same kind of decisions, and I think you should be making those kind of decisions.
Did you pull Bugshot, or is it free?
I pulled it. I made it free a few months after I released it. When it was clear, maybe 6 months after I released it, it became very clear after a while. It was making like between 0 and 3 sales a day, even at $1. It was doing very badly, and so I eventually I'm just like, screw it, I'll just make it free.
So why did you pull it after it was free?
It stopped working.
Oh, well, so there you go. That's the Marco strategy I endorse. Make it free. When it stops working, pull it. Because then you're not putting any more time into it. But like for something like Bugshot, just because Marco's not interested in putting a time in it doesn't make it all of a sudden not a useful application, especially for the poor. Like someone was saying, this idea of when you're not going to put any more time in your apps, leaving them on the store as free is bad because it clutters the store. No, that's exactly the kind of clutter I want. When I'm looking for an app and like I just want something quick and free, I want it to be an app that a good developer has abandoned. Maybe it's not the best app. Maybe it's an iOS 6, but it's not going to be filled with ads. It's actually going to do something useful. It's not going to be filled with, spammy reviews that somebody paid for. I would love to stumble upon Bugshot as a free screenshot annotation app that I needed in a pinch than stumbling on the 8,000 other free apps, which are probably not even screenshot apps at all, but some kind of like secret portal to, some sort of online gambling thing or something. Who knows? So I would say that you should consider putting fast text back as free until it stops working, then pull it. Don't put any more time into it if you don't want to. But if someone is looking for an app that does what fast text does and they stumble upon fast text, it's not filled with ads. It's not filled with malware. They'll download it for free. It'll do what it does. If they don't like it, they'll delete it. Fine. Like, I think, you did put work into it. It does do something. It is functional. Why not let people benefit from it? Even though you may feel bad about not updating or whatever, but I don't, I wouldn't spend time feeling bad about that because you're just making a choice about what to do with your time.
So one of the reasons is I feel like it's calling attention to something that isn't my best work, which I know you talked about with your CPAN modules, but I don't know. I as I've gotten older and as I've gotten to be some kind of internet persona, I take a lot of pride in the things that I put out into the internet. And while Camel, for example, the blogging software that I wrote that powers CaseyList.com, it's not terribly great code, but it's not terribly bad code, and it works. And honestly, I'm pretty proud of my website. And maybe some people read it, maybe they don't. Maybe some listeners will read it and be like, why is he proud of this? And that's okay. I mean, if you don't get it, that doesn't matter to me because I'm proud of it. And I'm not proud of fast text anymore. And
but see, don't you think that's the way it should be? Like, I've always considered it a badge of honor, a desirable trait, that if you are a programmer, you should always look back at the code you wrote in the past and think it's bad. Because if you don't, that means you're not getting any better. So if you look at the code you wrote last year, you should find problems with it now that you didn't find then. If you look at the code that you wrote 5 years ago, it should look disgusting. If you look at the code you wrote 10 years ago, it should look like nonsense and you can't even believe you were the same person who wrote it. Like, that should be true for the life of a working programmer. So the fact that you are no longer proud of FastText as a product, as a pile of source code, as a whatever, shows that you are making progress. That if you were to make it now, you would do it better. You would see things in it now that are, that are more wrong or that could be done. You know what I mean? Like, that, I don't think that should dissuade you. Like, and yes, it's not your best work. Yes, it's bad that someone might Google your name and stumble across this thing and not see the date on it. And like, I mean, it's the same thing with the CPAN module. Someone stumbles across, this my largest giant pile of public Perl code and looks at it as all crap and decide that I'm a crap programmer. That's like, I guess I'm willing to take that risk that they don't see the dates and or whatever, especially since this is a whole other topic that we can get to in a bit, especially since I am still actually maintaining that code, unlike you're deciding not to maintain FastText. But I don't think you should feel bad about it. Just because you're not proud of it. I think all your applications, all your endeavors, you should look back on and say, that is no longer up to my standards.
And I do. And I mean, and here's the comedy of all this. How I know I made the right call is I had like half an hour to fiddle around tonight, and I ended up adding a feature to Camel rather than futzing with FastText. And so that's how I knew that I probably made the right call. But I agree with you. And even as I was looking at Camel earlier tonight, I looked at it and thought, oh God, I should really refactor like half of this. But I feel like with FastText, it's sort of advertising that I'm not good at what I'm sort of supposed to be good at to be a part of this show.
Same thing as my CPAN modules. What Perl code of mine can you see? You can see old code that's bad. What code can't you see? All the code I write for my employers.
I think it's a little different. To me, I find it a little different, though, because your Perl code does not directly relate to the things that you're known for on the internet. It's not like the best analogy I can think of is like old crappy System 7 reviews that are still out on, which I know you never wrote, but just hypothetically.
Well, if you want to go for that, my old OS 10 reviews are terrible. The writing is terrible. I cannot even look at them. I've said this before, and I don't know why I'm the only person on the internet pointing this out, because it's the worst thing I've ever say about, but people don't seem to notice. I use smileys in some of them. Colon, close parentheses in the middle of the text. Do you understand that? That's what I'm known for. There's always 10 reviews, and they're out there, and the writing is terrible. The content is terrible. It's just, I don't even want to think about it. But am I going to pull those reviews? No.
You can release special editions that have all the crap removed and a bunch of new crap added.
Yeah, people keep asking for a collection of them, and I'm like, that would mean that I would have to make hard decisions about, it's like a George Lucas special edition. Do I take out the smileys? Like, where do I draw the line? Clean up the matte lines and the dust and scratches. The smileys count as matte lines? I think so.
Goodness. So I mean, I understand your point. I don't know. To me, it just seems. It seems different, probably because it's me and not you. And so I just look at it differently. But I understand your point about making it free. And that's actually something I hadn't really thought about. And maybe I'll do that. Maybe I won't. I don't know. But I feel like it calls attention to something. I guess what I'm trying to say is the CPAN modules, you have to kind of seek out. Whereas I think if I were a random person looking to figure out who the three of us are, for you, they would find your OS 10 reviews, which granted the older ones may not be great, but the newer ones are just freaking phenomenal. And for Marco, they'll find a laundry list of successful applications and projects.
And Business Insider blog posts.
Well, there's that too. But for me, I don't want someone to stumble upon FastText and judge me based on that. And I guess in summary, maybe it's just plain pride. But I don't know. I felt like the right answer was to pull it.
I got bad news for you, Casey. In several years, you're going to say the same thing about the podcast we're recording right now, and it will be the thing you're known for most widely on the internet.
That's very true. That's very true.
I mean, I feel like this is true of everything. Like that if you're getting better at things, which most of us do, continue to get better at things as we get older, especially things not having to do with physicality, you will look back on what you had done previously, even if it's the thing you're most known for. And think it is not up to your standards and that you could do better now or find things wrong with it that you didn't find wrong with it now. I think you should be proud of FastText. If I had an app on the App Store, I would leave it there until it broke. I think making it go free is entirely understandable, but I would definitely I would leave it out there just to sort of like prove to the world that, like you said, like, I did make an iOS app once and it does work and it did do things and here it is. And maybe you just change how you refer to it on sort of your online resume. So the same way you say, like in my little section on my website, like retired podcasts that I'm no longer doing, right? I don't know. I don't think you should feel as bad as you do, but you got to do what you got to do. I also think you should put feet on the icon, put it back in for a day, and then pull it.
You want me to sell it for you?
FastText? Yeah, sure. If you can get me more than $20.
Now, sell it to Marco. We need a reversal here. He needs to buy something instead of selling it.
Yeah, right. Well, why don't you tell us, Marco, about something that's awesome? And then I'd like to talk a little bit about like what John was referring to earlier, which is the implied time commitment of open source projects, which is a kind of different animal.
We are sponsored finally this week by our friends at Igloo. Igloo is an intranet you will actually like. It's built with easy-to-use apps like shared calendars, Twitter-like microblogs, file sharing, task management, and more. Igloo is everything you need to work better together in one very configurable cloud platform. Go to igloosoftware.com/ATP to sign up. It's free for up to 10 people and very reasonably priced after that. It's incredible. If you need an intranet for a group of 10 people or fewer, just go do it. It's free forever. Fantastic. igloosoftware.com/ATP. With Igloo's responsive design, your internet already works like a champ on virtually any device, iOS, Android, even BlackBerry. You can review a document, post a project update, or change admin settings all right from your phone. Plus, when you design your Igloo, any change you make to the look and feel carries across all the devices because all the designs are responsive and customizable to you. In fact, their file preview engine is also fully HTML5 compatible, so if one of your coworkers uploads a proposal, or a JavaScript file, or a document, you can preview that inline, add comments, upload new versions, or assign action items, all right from your phone, even if it doesn't support Flash or Java or anything like that, because it's all HTML5. So Igloo was recently featured in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. If you're a business, you know what this means. If you're a customer, this might sound like gibberish, but trust me, it's good. Gartner's famous Magic Quadrant for social software included Igloo. They appear for the 6th consecutive year, alongside tech giants like Microsoft, IBM, Google, VMware, Salesforce.com, and SAP. In a report that values the viability of the vendor, Igloo is praised for their responsiveness and customer experience. If your company has a legacy intranet built on SharePoint or old portal technology, you definitely should give Igloo a try. They're really cool. Fantastic intranet. Really an intranet you will actually like. And anybody who's ever had to use a corporate intranet before, that's a pretty bold statement. And they follow through with it. It's really great. So check out Igloo. Go to igloosoftware.com/ATP to sign up. And it's free to use with up to 10 people and very reasonably priced after that. Really, free for up to 10 people. You might as well do it. There's no downside. Go try it. Free for up to 10 people. Go to igloosoftware.com/ATP. Thanks a lot.
So the other thing I wanted to talk about is the implied time commitments of open source software. And I first became affected by this when I open sourced Camel, which again is the Node.js based blogging platform that I use to power my website. And I got enough attention from it that a handful of people had forked it and had issued pull requests and or made various comments on GitHub. And I noticed that a lot of times I just didn't have the time to handle these in a timely manner. And apparently I'm trying to squeeze the word time into the sentence 34 times. Anyway,
nice.
I see what I did there? Meow. So anyhow, occasionally there were instances where people would issue a pull request, wait a day or two, and then like pull or rescind the pull request saying, oh, I guess you didn't like this.
Those people are jerks.
Well, Kinda, yeah. But nevertheless, at the same time, I feel or felt, especially when there was a little more activity a few months back, I felt this like overwhelming burden put on me to get through these pull requests in a timely manner. And I probably shouldn't have, and this comes back to what John was saying earlier, but nevertheless, I felt huge amounts of guilt and this burden because I wasn't getting through these pull requests quickly enough. And it was something I totally did not expect. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing in that people care enough to be issuing these pull requests. But at the same time, I was not prepared for it. I kind of thought in my head that I was going to just throw it out into the internet and then kind of walk away and never look back. And turns out that's not really the case.
Yeah, so the thing that I'm struggling with is similar, only over a longer timeline. And now you can tell me what you think I should do about this. So I've got these C-band modules out there. Most of them nobody uses anymore, which is kind of the ideal that Casey was looking for. You're like, you throw it out there and, and no one looks at it again. And like if something like my first one, actually from the 90s, probably doesn't even work anymore, but no one downloads it. So nobody knows that. So it's fine. But I do have a couple that people are still using. And what you did back in the day, and what you probably still do today when you had a C-band module that became popular, is you made a website for it, you hosted the source code somewhere where people could, you had a bug tracker, you put it in version control, you gave out commit bits to the repository for people who wanted to contribute to the project, you started a mailing list, and like you built up this ecosystem around it.
Yeah.
Pre-GitHub. Yeah, well, this is way before GitHub. Like this is before SourceForge. Like when SourceForge came, it was like, wow, this whole website does all this stuff for you. So one of the actual time commitments of having an open source project like this is that I have had to move those things to new places when the old places go away or become crappy, like SourceForge has. All right, so I moved from SourceForge to Google Code. I'll probably move from Google Code to GitHub. Move version control from CVS to Subversion. Now I'm starting to show my age here. I should probably move from Subversion to Git, which I probably will do eventually. And those are things. It's like at the time you have those decisions, it's like, well, I could just leave it there forever, but maybe the mailing list broke, or maybe something's not working, or maybe nobody uses CVS anymore. So do I not put any more time in and just, like remove it from the internet or just like let it die? Or do I put in the day or two to move these things? And historically, I've decided that it's worth putting in the time to do these conversions and to move the stuff around or whatever. And the second part of it is, so you've got this, especially with like the mailing list, you've got a mailing list. It's kind of like an implicit support channel where people will post questions and the mailing list is so low volume that the only person on the mailing list who can answer them is me. And over the course of a decade, literally, there's this mailing list there, which has degenerated to, I give free support for a module that I haven't worked on in years, right? So people ask a question and literally the only person who will answer is me. And should I spend time answering these people? They're not my customers. They're not giving me any money. Do I have any commitment to help these people with their programming problems, which often have nothing to do with my module? Not really. And so I struggle with the guilt of like, do I just not answer anyone's questions anymore? And that's how this mailing list dies. Do I shut down the mailing list? Or do I spend the 5 minutes to answer a question? And then the final thing, which Casey was getting to, is the equivalent in, the Google Code world and using Subversion in Google Code instead of Git and GitHub of pull requests and bug reports. Someone reports a bug. Someone reports a bug and provides a patch. Someone makes a feature request. Feature requests, I'm pretty okay with just ignoring at this point. It's like, well, yeah, if you want, then implement it. But then what if they go off and implement it? If they implemented it and send me a patch, then I have to get with like Casey, where it's like, well, I probably wouldn't add that feature myself, or maybe I would add it, but I would do it in a different way. And the same thing with bug fixes. They send a patch with a bug fix and a test and everything else and documentation. And it's like, it just always takes some time to clean those things up, put them in, test them, cut a new release, so on and so forth. And my decision so far has been, I will incorporate bug fixes. If you report a bug that's reproducible and you have a test case, I will fix that bug or figure out what it takes to fix it. So I won't add features for the most part, unless you send a feature tied up in a little bow. I'll spend the 15 minutes, half an hour to get it integrated. Or for a module that I myself don't use anymore, that is terrible and that no one should really use, that is really old, that has source code that I can barely look at anymore. But I mean, I don't know what's driving me to put any time into it, and yet I am. And so I almost feel like that I'm like a slave to the lingering popularity of a once popular set of Perl modules that I don't know how to, like, sometimes I find myself thinking when I get a message in the email list and someone makes some demand or whatever, I'm like, why don't you just implement it yourself? Like, if you're so hot and bothered to do this, like, you know, I feel like saying, why should I answer this question for you? Why should I fix this bug? Like, you get resentful. Like, it's not their fault. Like, I don't act on these instincts, but you feel like, and I'm your free servant. Why? Like, it's like a Stack Overflow of one. Like, it's Stack Overflow, but I'm the only person giving answers, right? And like I said, a lot of the time it's, you know, it's from either something simple where they don't understand something basic about programming, or like the insanely most complex thing. I've got this and that and the other thing, and they're all tied together like this, and I'm doing this and that, and I would like to be able to do this. And can you think of a way I can do this? And it's like, are you kidding? That's what I do for a job. I get paid to do that. That is a very complicated problem that we would have to have a whiteboard and like days to sit down to figure out. And it's like, oh, answer for free for me in this mailing list. It just, so I'm in a bad situation with these things, and I'm mostly dealing with it by doing the minimum work necessary to make myself not feel guilty, which means actually fixing bugs because, hey, people are using these things. And if I don't want to fix bugs, like, my final out is to hand off this module to someone who cares. Like, you know, it's the equivalent of Marco selling his stuff to someone who wants to continue the thing. Is there somebody who wants to take over maintainership of this? Here you go with it. And I won't do that because I still have some tiny bit of pride in, like, this was once a pretty good thing. I spent a long time implementing and writing tests and documentation, and it still kind of works, sort of. And, you know, I don't know. I just don't feel like I want to give it up because I don't know. So anyway, I don't know how to deal with that situation. And it's a constant source of guilt and potential time suckage.
Now, Marco, how have you dealt with FC Model? Because that's probably the most active of anything we've described, I would guess.
Well, recently, I mean, probably the most used thing I've ever done is Bugshot Kit, which I haven't touched in a long time. And again, for many of the same reasons that I haven't touched Bugshot. In fact, much of Bugshot's code is in Bugshot Kit, but it's mostly because, you know, I did it, it worked, I used it for a while. I no longer use Bugshot Kit in my own app because I just don't really need that kind of integration of testing and stuff anymore. And that's it. So I haven't touched it in a long time, and it doesn't really need anything. It generally works, and, you know, all the code is pretty simple. And if you need it to do something, you can just do it yourself in your own app. I do occasionally get pull requests on Bugshot Kit. If it's something really trivial that's an obvious, you know, minor improvement or minor bug fix, I'll just accept it. If it's more than that, I'll usually just sit on it and forget to do it for months, and then eventually it'll become so ridiculously outdated that you know, there's no point in accepting it. Kind of like old emails. With FC Model, it's different though. So there really isn't a group of people out there wandering around looking at like your open source library that does some really specific thing that they don't need to do, or that does some really general thing like your utility library. Like, I have my utility library open source, like so many people do. Nobody uses it. Nobody looks at it. I get no pull requests on it. Like, it gets no activity because there's not a whole lot of people looking around for your utility library. so it just, like, there's not a lot of value to that for most people. To get pull requests, they don't just come from the pull request fairies. They come from people who are using your code, people who need the code you've written, who value it, the code for which there aren't a lot of alternatives, or there aren't a lot of big, well-known alternatives, and that they need to be modified in some way. And then the percentage of those people who actually go through with the modification, or at least filing a bug report with you, or asking you about it, rather than just ripping it out and doing something else, or fixing it quietly themselves and never submitting it back to you. So for most projects, most open source projects, the reason why you probably get no pull requests is because, like, just having open source something doesn't inherently make it, like, useful to enough people that they will start using it and submitting improvements to you. I do completely agree with John that it is kind of annoying, though, when somebody submits a pull request that is, like, well-intentioned, but either something that I wouldn't do or something I would have done differently.
Well, ignoring even pull requests, what if someone sent you an email, because you don't have a mailing list for FC Model or any of these things as far as I know, sent you an email and said, hey, I was using your whatever, your utility library, FC Model, Bugshot Kit, whatever, and I was trying to do X, and I couldn't quite figure out a way to do it. I tried to do this, and it didn't quite work, and I thought maybe you could do that, but I'm not sure if I'm using your own. Can you help me? What would you do with that email?
I wouldn't respond, probably, unless it was a really quick response.
You would not respond at all?
I would treat it like any other support email. I mean, I get so much email, I can't spend like a half hour responding to that.
I know. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like that type of email. All right. So, and imagine if you got like maybe 3 of those a week for a decade. Like it starts to wear on you. I just feel like because you feel so bad. Like I'm the king of ignoring people's emails, right?
I don't know about that.
But even I start to feel bad because it's like, especially with programming questions, and it happens on Twitter too. It's like I could get the answer to this question often by at this point. Like it might as well be someone else's code because I don't remember it anymore. Like you could figure out, the answer to the question could be, you can't use my utility library to do that because it doesn't work that way. And then you feel like now you're in a conversation with them. They're going to be like, well, can you add that feature? And then your only answer is like, no, because I'm not spending time on that and I don't want it. And then it's like you already wasted more time than you wanted to spend on this. And that's the best case, trying to get out as fast as possible. The worst case is you don't know the answer and you'd have to investigate. And you're like, why am I investigating this guy's programming problem? You know what I mean? Like, just because you wrote FC Model, does that mean that there is implicit support contract with everyone who tries to use FC Model? Do you have to provide them support?
No.
Like, I don't think you do. But if you don't, you end up looking like a jerk. If you reply and say, sorry, this library is not supported, they're going to be like, I demand my money back. Like, what are they going to say? But they will think you're a jerk.
FC Model is actually a really good example of everything working very, very well. So the quick version is it's a very thin, lightweight model layer. Instead of using something like Core Data, it's basically sticking a very thin layer right on top of SQLite, and you can do things, like the database would. I use this because I'm a jerk and I don't like Core Data, and I like to write everything myself. So I wrote this thing. FC Model has what appears to be very few users. I think I would guess the number of people building apps with it is probably less than 10. It is a very small group of people, but of those, like 3 or 4 of them actually actively submit pull requests, and they're actually really good. And and usually we'll discuss something like before a substantial change. We'll discuss it in an issue, and then I'll write the fix. Because I'm a control freak. But when people have submitted so many like little tiny bug fixes and little improvements here and there, they're only a few lines long, and that's all great.
But you still are supporting it then, because when someone says, hey, I was trying to do this thing and it didn't work, or it would be cool if it did this, you are providing support, because your support is engaging in a discussion with them about the feature, getting at the heart of what it is that they want, and then you maintaining ownership by essentially saying, well, this is how I would do it and this is what I would do, and then implementing that. So it's a support function. You're essentially implementing features at their request, maybe just not exactly the way they did, and talking to them and answering their questions about it.
Well, I am, but if it's like a how does this work question, usually I don't answer those. And so sometimes somebody else will, which is really nice, but usually I don't get a lot of those, because again, not a lot of people use this.
And the people who use it know what they're doing. Like, it's not a bunch of beginners flooding in who like, I just started writing my first iOS app and I stumbled across your thing. Can you tell me how to use it?
Right, because they're not going to be looking for something like this. They're going to be using Core Data because that's what all the tutorials use, and that's fine. They shouldn't be using something like this probably.
And Core Data is much simpler than your module, so it'll be fine.
Right. So yeah, right. What's great about this though is the reason why I'm engaged with it, the reason why I react to the pull requests and I improve it is purely selfish. It's because I use it in Overcast. And I will probably use it in any near future apps that I would write as well. Like, not that I'm starting anything. This is not a product announcement. Just if I would start something new, I'd probably use it again. That's why I pay attention, because it's improving my app too. And my needs for Overcast drive FC Model's development. The bugs I run into, I fix in FC Model, etc. The performance issues I run into, I fix there. Everyone gets it.
See, this is the honeymoon period when you're still using it for your own work. I had several years of that too. It was like my CPAN modules, for the most part, were written for jobs I had at the time, so that I could write them, put them up, and then get the benefits. I was able to convince the various people who I work for that there is a benefit in open sourcing this part of the product, because I will get usage from other people, bug reports from other people, and like, the open source model. And it worked for the years that the software was relevant. But as it became less relevant and sort of aged out, I stopped using it. Other people stopped using it. Now it's like in zombie form. Right now, FC Model is new, relevant, extremely relevant in light of the various weird, iCloud Core Data things that were going on, right? And which motivated its existence. And that, so it's definitely in the period where you are reaping the benefit of this being a module that is, it's not widely used. You said like 10 active people, but it's useful to you. Even if you were the only user, you would like to have it out there just in case someone happens to stumble across it because and find some bug or whatever. Like even the talking to the bear thing, where say nobody ever looks at the source code, but the mere act of you publishing it, like the mere act of you publishing a blog post, will suddenly cause you to find a typo that you didn't see when you had been staring at it for the previous hour when it was in your unpublished state.
Oh yeah, I mean, FC Model is probably the best code in Overcast by a long shot.
And would you say that's because of the contributions?
No, because he had to show it to people, so he had to clean it up to make it look not embarrassing.
It's both. I mean, like one thing the contributions have really helped with is like the contributions will often be by very good Cocoa programmers who have been around much longer than I have at this, or were just better than me at it. And they will use a convention that I didn't even know existed. Like instead of doing preprocessor defines for string constants, they'll do the extern thing, or like using NS-enum instead of defining an enum the old C way, so that some autocomplete thing works better. Like there's little things like that I pick up from the pull requests. Then I start doing that everywhere. So like it's like I'm working with a bunch of smart people who are slowly and subtly improving my own skills by showing me cool things I could do that I didn't even realize I could do, or showing me better ways of doing things and oftentimes in very small ways, but over time that builds up. I mean, FC Model is really it is by far the only successful open source thing I've ever done, and the most successful open source thing I've ever done. Everything else I've ever open sourced has been really minimally benefited anybody, including me. And John, you're right. FC Model is in the honeymoon phase now because I'm using it. I stopped using Bugshot Kit, and so Bugshot Kit is languishing, and it will probably never get an update again. If I ever stop using FC Model, the project will probably die at that point, or somebody else can take it over if they want to, but probably nobody would want to. And that would be it. But right now I'm still using it, and I suspect I'll be using it for a while. So right now I'm fine.
Yeah, so I guess my way out is I just have to get better at ignoring. I don't know if I can ever ignore bug reports, though. I can probably ignore questions, feature requests, stuff like that. Although that'll be sad because that'll, people will, I don't know. It'll be sad. But bug reports, like how can I ignore them? I can let them just pile up. Like,
yeah,
there's a bug. I just feel like I have to fix it, especially because it's. But it still works though. Like it's still working software. And it's like it's a shame to let working software become unworking just because of one minor thing. I don't know. I will probably just continue to limp along with this stuff. Like I keep hoping that people will lose interest entirely, but they don't. People still sign up for the mailing list, and I don't understand. I'm conflicted.
Thanks a lot to our sponsors this week, Oscar, Backblaze, and Igloo, and we will see you next week.
Now the show is over. They didn't even mean to begin, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. John didn't do any research. Marco and Casey wouldn't let him, 'cause it was accidental. Oh, it was accidental. And you can find the show notes at atp.fm. And if you're into Twitter, you can follow them at CASEYLISS. So that's Casey Liss, MARCOARMENT, Marco Arment, SIRAC, USA Syracuse. It's accidental. They didn't mean to. Accidental. Tech.
So, John, you got a PS4.
Yeah, when did I get it? Last week sometime. I knew I was going to get one eventually, and I kept telling myself I will get one when there's a game that I want to play. And of course, I would love for that game to be Last Guardian, but I figured surely there'll be some other game that I want to play before that. When The Last of Us Remastered came out, I thought that might be the game, but I had just very recently played the non-remastered one on PS3, so that didn't make me buy a PS4. And I don't know what made me buy one now. I think it's kind of my tradition, pre-Christmas present to myself that I give myself before Christmas, so I don't have to wait for Christmas, so I can play with it in the vacation before Christmas. That's a long title, but that has become a tradition in my family that I buy myself something that I wanted and give it to myself before Christmas morning so I can play with it while I'm on vacation. And so the PS4 fit the bill for that because I was going to get one anyway. But I didn't really know what kind of games I was going to get for it, and so I just got a mix of a lot of downloadable titles because I didn't want to bother getting discs shipped to me or whatever. And I still think that they load faster off the hard drive. If that's not true, please don't tell me because I like to keep my illusions. But yeah, so I downloaded a bunch of stuff. And what am I playing? I'm not playing anything all that exciting. I got Destiny. My son is already addicted to that. Destiny is exactly what I thought it would be. It's fine. The controller just destroys my hands playing Destiny. The analog sticks are still in the wrong spot. You got to use all 4 triggers at the same time. It is an ergonomic nightmare for me. I really need to limit my time playing the game, which is a shame because I find it fun. I think Destiny's pretty well done. I don't know why I got such terrible reviews. I guess people have higher expectations, but I consider it more of a long-term investment, and my son is really enjoying it. So when I saw reviews like 6.5 out of 10 for Destiny, maybe it was buggier on launch. Maybe just people have higher expectations, but it fully satisfies everything that I thought it would be. It's not really my type of game, but anyway. But what mostly is annoying me about the PS4 is, and I knew this going in, is that it is not going to be a drop-in replacement for my PS3 because Sony concentrated so heavily on the game features that they're seemingly like obstinately opposed to doing media center type stuff. Like they don't sell a Bluetooth like remote for it, not, like a remote that looks like a TV remote. So you have to use the game if you want to use it as your own Blu-ray player. Like my PS3 has always been my Blu-ray player. If you want to use your PS4 as your Blu-ray player, you have to use the controller, and that is ridiculous. I'm not going to have the controller sitting there on the end table so I can. I just won't do that. There are third-party remotes that you can buy, but all of them had terrible reviews, and a lot of them use an IR interface connected to the USB thing. And whatever. It's like, Sony, can you just make a remote? Like, charge some stupid, ridiculous amount for it. I'll buy it. I just want a remote.
They used to, didn't they? For the PS3?
Yeah, the PS3 has a Bluetooth remote that works with the PS3. I'm pretty sure it doesn't work with the PS4. If it does work with the PS4, someone in the chat room tell me, and I will.
Yes, I control my PS3 with the Logitech Harmony thing because that has a Bluetooth interface and that can do it, and it works great.
Yeah, if I can find, if anyone knows, if they want to send feedback to the show, a Bluetooth remote that works with the PS4 natively without any weird drivers and that works well, that's fine. And as someone in the chat room just pointed out, my very next point, no DLNA support for streaming video off all the various devices in my house that can do that. And so, forget about like having a Plex app or anything like that. Just the basic media center type stuff. It can play Blu-rays. You can play Blu-ray movies on it. And I bet it's a pretty okay Blu-ray player. Although when I was researching this, I saw a lot of people complaining with the very first version of the PS4 software that the Blu-ray player wasn't even as good as the PS3 one. So I still have my PS3 attached. I still use it as my Blu-ray player. I don't really use it for DLNA that much because my TV does it now natively. So I don't want to turn on the PS3 if I don't have to. But depending on where video comes from and what format it's in, sometimes I have to use PS3 media server. Sometimes I have to use the PS3 to stream for someplace else. Sometimes I can stream directly from my TV. But I got a lot of things attached to my TV now. Like if I can't get rid of my PS3 when I get rid of my PS4, and I can't get rid of my Wii when I get my Wii U because the Wii still plays GameCube games and has GameCube connectors, like I got 5 game consoles connected to my TV, plus Apple TV, plus TiVo, plus I'm running out of inputs here. So as I really hope that the media center type capabilities of the PS4 get better. But right now it's disappointing to me that I can't make a clean upgrade. And it's also disappointing that like the shape of the PS4, if you put a PS3 on top of a PS4, it doesn't look right to me. It looks like the front of the PS4 is all slanty and it doesn't make a pleasing shape. And of course you can't put the PS4 on top of the PS3 because it's curved like a George Foreman grill, so it'll skitter off. And the PS4 doesn't have feet on the bottom. It has these 3 little rubber curve things that make kind of a tripod that elevate the PS4 barely off the surface, but because the air intakes are not on the bottom. So you could have the thing flush, but if you put it on top of another piece of AV equipment, it will be blocking the holes more or less on the thing that it's on top of. So I had to buy some clear rubber feet to elevate it to let air get to the devices underneath it. And I'm out of Ethernet ports by the TV, so I had to buy a new switch. And it's just, at least I'm not out of plugs in the power strip yet, but I'm getting close.
Do you have a thing with missing feet?
I was just about to say that. Get out of my head.
What, missing feet? What do you mean?
Fast text icon, dude.
Oh, yeah. All right, fine. Yeah. So anyway, the controller is an improvement over the PS3 one, but the button layout is still wrong. The sticks are still in the wrong spot. The triggers are better, but not that much better. And those controllers are expensive, they're like $50 each. Oh, and the touchpad thing that they added is not a good touchpad, but it does make text input slightly less painful because you can use the touchpad to move the little cursor around onto the key things.
Would you ever consider stacking the PS4 with a non-Sony system to make it stack better with your stuff, or does it have to be stacked with the PS3?
No, I would stack it with anything that I could stack it with, but you've seen my setup. There's not a lot of room in that little shelf there. There's only two possible places it can go, under the PS3 or on top of my receiver. And under the PS3, it looked weird, and on top of my receiver is where it is now, but I get some feet to elevate it up.
Second question. Would you consider daisy chaining 2 receivers to get like 7 more HDMI inputs?
No, you don't daisy chain them. You can just get a switching box. So the switching box are terrible. Is why I got this receiver, because I was trying to find a balance of. I would have got the Sony receiver that had 10 HDMI inputs, but there's just this huge thread of horror stories about it blanking out and having all sorts of problems. So like, I should link to that thread. It's gone on for like 40 pages of people complaining to Sony and them trying to fix it. And anyway, I'm glad I didn't get that one. So I got this one that had all the features that I wanted and had 6 HDMI ports, but one of them is on the front.
Oh,
My TV has 4 or 3. Like, I still have options. Like, I try to connect the consoles directly to the TV to reduce input lag. So I still have enough options for the devices I have. I'm not out of ports. Like, I'm close to being out of ports on the receiver, but I can connect both of the consoles, the current gen consoles, well, the PS4 and the Wii U, directly to the TV, and the Wii is connected directly to the TV for input lag reasons. So I'm not really out of ports, but next generation of consoles, I'm going to have to make some hard decisions about what to do, because I won't be getting a new TV by then if I can help it.
yeah, but that's probably going to be how many years away, though? It's probably a while off, right?
Yeah, I know. I was pleasantly surprised by the general speediness and UI of I think the PS3 UI is, it's not good, but it's understandable. And the PS4 UI is a mild evolution of that. It looks a little bit more spammy and in my face. But it's fast. It works. Got on my Wi-Fi nicely. It could use the LAN port. Like, I didn't have any weird problems with anything. It pretty much just worked. Download speeds were reasonable. Downloading stuff from the store worked fine. I guess it is much better at this stage in its life than the PS3 was at this stage. I can tell you that. So I still endorse it over the Xbox One as a game system, and not just because I have latent Microsoft tape, but also because And for the people, the doubters in the chat room, I still believe Last Guardian will ship. I still believe. You can't stop me.